Well, this is it, guys. This is the most requested video I've had since I started reviewing all these classic Saturn games. So sit back and enjoy, because this is going to be a long one. We're going to start off with the story. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on it, even though this is an RPG, meaning, you know, you sort of expect it to be more fleshed out and deeper than the first two Panzer Dragoon games, and fear not, it is. Saga takes place after the events of the first two games, but before Panzer Dragoon Orta, which was released on the original Xbox. Like all the games in the series, Saga takes place in a post-apocalyptic age where humans live in small cities and towns and wild creatures roam everywhere. The Empire is the largest of the human factions left, and it basically built itself up thanks to what little remains of the Ancients' technology. The Ancients are what people from thousands of years ago are called during like the modern time, and these people sort of took on almost like a religious sort of standing. These guys are the ones that had, you know, really advanced technology. They created bioengineered creatures before they basically wiped off all life from Earth thanks to some war. This is what you're sort of like hinted at. And this is kind of what makes the universe so interesting, because you don't really know what the Ancients are, or exactly like what happened to them, and where did they get all these weird powers, and why did they start creating all these bioengineered creatures, etc. The game itself, it begins with a young mercenary named Edge protecting an excavation site for the Empire. He's here with his captain and a few others from the group, a couple of friends and stuff like that. The folks that are actually in the excavation site are digging up a few things from the Ancients. They obviously are from the Empire. Suddenly he hears screams, and it appears as though the Empire soldiers are fighting something in the cave, so he jumps on in, only to discover a really nasty creature. While fighting the creature, he happens to see what looks like a woman buried in the wall of the cave. Without a second to think about it, the excavation site is suddenly attacked by Imperial troops led by Kramen. Kramen wants this mysterious girl for himself, killing everyone in the excavation site, including Edge, whose body is thrown into a massive pit. Kramen takes the girl and flies away. While Edge is falling, something spiritual saves his life. That's all you know. You're not told exactly what it is, but while making his way out of the excavation site, a dragon swoops in and saves him from that original creature that was attacking the site before. The two communicate telepathically, and a powerful connection is made. Edge vows revenge on Kramen for killing his captain and his friends in the assault, and wants to know more about this mysterious woman that he saw in the excavation site. And that's pretty well how the game begins. You're basically chasing down Kramen. Obviously, the story gets more and more interesting as you progress, and it's one of those, you know, RPGs that you'll be telling yourself, nah, I'm just going to play for a little bit longer, and a little bit longer, and a little bit longer. As with any video game, gameplay is the most important thing, and in Panzer Dragoon Saga, gameplay is broken down into your typical RPG elements. You have exploration areas, a world map, and finally a battle system. So we're going to start off with the most basic one first, which is exploring. But believe it or not, it's not as simple as you may think, because it's broken up into two distinct elements. There is the ground exploring and the much richer aerial exploring. While on ground, you typically only have access to very limited areas. It's not one of these games where you're going to spend loads of time on foot. You typically interact with people and objects like you see in the video. You'll talk to different people, what have you. In order to investigate different objects or to talk to people, you press either the A or the C buttons, and you bring up a reticule, which you then move around the screen and you highlight whatever it is you want to interact with. While in the air, exploring works pretty well the exact same way, except you can also bring up your map, which you'll see me do from time to time by pressing the start button, and that allows you to, you know, figure out where you got to go. Obviously, because the majority of the game is spent in the air, these particular areas are much more vast than the towns and what have you. The beginning portions of this video show examples of me just messing around, like you'll see, like talking to people in a caravan or flying around the oasis here. What's also interesting is that there's no actual dungeons in this game as in the traditional sense. Areas themselves act as dungeons, allowing you to traverse really unique places as you make your way through the storyline. Did you notice anything when I was actually speaking to people? Probably not, because I'm talking too much, but they will actually speak back to you. The entire game is actually voice acted. Even generic non-important characters will have something to say. And this was really extremely impressive for 1998, and even remains impressive all the way to today, and it's one of the key reasons why the game is 4 CDs long. Now remember that, it is 4 discs long, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So the next portion we need to cover is the world map. You've already seen it in the video here. It's accessible at almost any time by just going into the basic menu system and accessing world map. The menu system works just like any other system and allows you to look at different items you've collected, access the local map, the world map, and equip different attachments to Edge's handgun. The world map itself is broken down into key exploration areas, as you'll see in the video as I go from one area to the next, and allows you to go back to previously explored areas for further exploration. Finally, we come to the most complex area of discussion, the battle system. So first off, just like almost all the RPGs released in the late 90s, Panzer Dragoon Saga features random encounters. But don't freak out, they don't occur too often. That's very good news. As you can tell from the video, there are 3 different meters that fill up on the lower right hand side of the screen. These gauges allow you to perform a variety of actions. If one gauge is filled, you can use Edge's gun and pinpoint an attack directly on one of the enemies. If 2 or more gauges are filled, you can use the dragon's homing lasers or its berserk attacks, which work sort of like magic in this game. It's also possible to transform the dragon into different forms once you've unlocked that ability, which you'll see later on in the video. Now, depending on the dragon form, you can inflict more damage to your enemies, or defend yourself more, or use more berserk attacks, etc. You can also learn new attacks depending on which form you play more as you start to level up. You'll notice also a BP meter, which works exactly like a magic meter, essentially allowing you to perform different berserk attacks that have different levels of points that are required. Where the battle system gets really interesting, though, is that you have complete freedom to move around your enemies, so you're not just stuck there doing absolutely nothing. If you notice, while I'm in attack mode, a small map is displayed in the lower middle portion of the screen that acts almost like a compass. The map, or compass, whatever, is divided into 4 quadrants, with the yellow dragon icon moving from one to the next as I move around. Green areas mean you cannot be harmed as long as you're within that green portion of the quadrant, whereas red is basically telling you the enemies can attack. Enemies typically have weak spots you can find, and most of them are located directly in the red quadrants, as obvious, they wouldn't make it too easy for you. That means essentially the way this works is you attack and move, attack and move. Enemies also have the ability to move around you, though, so you need to watch out for that. If you see me moving around like a lunatic in the video, it's because basically I'm trying to evade an incoming attack and setting up my own patterns to attack them. This is particularly evident in the very last video you're going to see in this video. The enemy dragon is constantly trying to force me into the front of it so that it can do a really powerful berserk attack on me. Another interesting aspect to the battle system is the way you're ranked. Depending on how many moves you make, how often you're hit, and how quickly you defeat the enemies, you're awarded a specific rank ranging from excellent to basically, wow, you suck. Okay, well, maybe not. It's not like that, but the idea is basically you want to defeat your enemies as quickly and efficiently as possible in order to score the greatest amount of experience points and dying, which is the game's currency. Failure to perform well, and basically you're not going to level up as quick. But once you get the hang of the system and you get good, you're really going to have a good time with this game. So that's pretty much how Panzer Dragoon Saga works. You explore the world on foot and in air to push a storyline further, you get sucked into battles along the way, and you use the interesting battle system to take on foes and eventually finish the game. One thing you don't hear many Sega fans talk about, though, is the game's overall length. This isn't a very long RPG, and it can actually be finished in around 16 hours or so, depending on how you level up. Just to give you an idea, I was easily able to finish the first disc in about 3.5 hours, but I leveled up to level 21, so take that into consideration. I could have just as easily finished it in about 2 hours if I didn't go crazy with leveling up. The good news is that you don't need to spend hours on end grinding, which many of you are going to be very pleased to hear. As I mentioned before, this bad boy is 4 discs long, and what you're seeing in the video will actually show how I switch the discs, because unlike the multi-disc PlayStation releases, this one saves your game at the end of the disc, which is what the PlayStation one did, but then it resets the system to the dashboard where you swap discs and basically load up the new one. I'm not entirely sure why you couldn't just save your game and then swap the disc without it going back into the dashboard, but whatever, no big deal, it's just different. So I already mentioned the excellent voice acting, but it deserves mentioning again. It's really good, honestly. It's not in English for anyone who's interested, but I absolutely love it, and it still holds up perfectly well today. And I was utterly shocked when I played this in 1998. I mean, coming off of big titles like Final Fantasy VII that were basically silent, and then you're coming into this, it was really staggering to see just that every single person had something to say. The graphics were very impressive for the Saturn back in 1998 with full motion video and what have you, although the full motion video I found was always very, very grainy in relation to some of the PlayStation stuff. But I'll be really honest, the graphics themselves haven't aged too well for today. Even back in 1998, these weren't exactly the strongest polygons we had ever seen, what with Metal Gear Solid and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time being released the same year as Panzer Dragoon Saga, and those had just significantly more detail, I guess you could say. This one suffers from a little bit of flickering and some pop-in, and it's just not quite as detailed. The environments are varied, but there isn't too much to them, as you can see in the videos. I mean, it made sense considering this is a post-apocalyptic setting, right? It's understandable why the areas are barren, but it does make exploration feel a little bit on the lonely side. So as I mentioned in my Panzer Dragoon 2 review, there are a few unlockable goodies you'll get if you play that one and this one together, or one of them first, or what have you. And there's no need to retread over the same ground, though. The bottom line on everyone's mind should be, should I buy this game? And I'm gonna put things into perspective before I deal with that. Panzer Dragoon Saga apparently is lost forever because the original source code went missing. Why that happened is of great debate within Sega, but without the original source code, it can never be released on another platform without being fully recreated from the ground up, and I just don't see that happening, considering the series doesn't sell like 5 million units or what have you. Next, this was released on April 30th, 1998, long after every major retailer stopped carrying the Saturn and Saturn games, peripherals, everything, thereby making it extremely rare because so few copies were ever actually made in English. Finally, it has gained a massive cult following, making it highly sought after, some even going so far as to claim that this is one of the best RPGs, if not the best RPG ever made. If you add all these things together, you're looking at a video game that typically sells for over $200 on eBay whenever it actually shows up, which isn't too often. So the $200 or more question is it worth buying at that price? And I honestly can't answer that for you, but I can try and help you out. I paid around $100 for this game back in 1998, and I'm a huge fan of the series. Are you? If so, then it is perhaps worth it to relive an excellent RPG, and one that's really wholly unique. If you're only casually following the series and just got into the Saturn now, it's hard to recommend you spend that kind of money on a game you may only play for like 20 hours. I'd say to play the first 2 games first, and if you can't get enough of them, then make that call. Otherwise, honestly, this might be one RPG you're just going to have to afford to miss out on. Ultimately, the choice is yours, but I can say I'm very proud to have picked this up when I did, as it remains an extremely fun-playing RPG, even after all these years, and honestly, not many RPGs can say that a decade or more after their original release.